Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We had an overwhelming registrations for this, which suggests to me that there's quite a lot of interest. That said, I think a lot of people might be taking advantage of the recordings and or slides that we send out to people afterwards as well. So we'll crack on. All I can say is thank you. The other thing I might just say is that Dan Mackay, who I'm doing the Dog and Pony show with, he's not flash today, so it might be just a dog and dog show. Dan's with us, but we'll try and save his voice. Here he is. We'll try and save his voice a little bit because he's not all that well. But thank you for joining us. So we might crack into our Change Powered by Parbery webinar series. This is the first session, session 1, and we've got a number of sessions that follow in the coming weeks. All right, we might go into it, Dan. So I might just do a quick introduction for myself. So I specialise in enterprise business transformations, the big changes for larger organisations. Have done that for a number of organisations across government in particular, and some private sector organisations around Telstra is one of those. Large programs of work, large change and transformations. Michelle Austin is one of our other leads in the practice, and she's located in our Brisbane office. I don't think Michelle's online today because she's out helping one of our customers. But she may support us in subsequent sessions going forward. Her voice is always a very cheery voice and most welcome in these webinars because she's got a font of knowledge. And Dan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So Dan Mackay, nice to see you all. As Kim suggested, sorry, can you hear me? Sorry,
Dan, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Can't hear you.
I can hear you, Dan.
Oh, you can hear me, Eric? Okay, thanks. So
all right, I'll keep going in the face of Dan. We can't hear Dan at the moment. He might look at sorting out his comms. But so Dan is a doer, and some of you know him. He's working over in Defence at the moment. And really, he's got a few decades of experience in organisational change management, really coming from a design perspective. I think that was the original part of his career, and I think that served him well very much in sort of the large organisational changes and transformations. He's got a lot to offer, and hopefully we'll get his voice comms back as part of this going forward. So thank you. We'll do the next slide. Dan, have you got voice back?
I believe, Kim, it might be a problem at your end that the audience can actually hear me.
All right, apologies, everybody. It might be the microphone is clicked off, Dan, from what I can see. Let's see whether we can sort out that microphone issue as we go forward.
Hey, Kim.
All right, so we'll keep going on. So the first few slides that we're going to go through is really a little bit about Parbery and our point of view from a change management perspective. I won't be repeating that in subsequent, or we won't be repeating that in subsequent sessions. It's very much, I guess, the introduction as to who we are and what our organisation's all about. Our mission as an organisation is to provide top-tier advice that's within your reach. We specialise in government and government organisations, particularly in defence, but also state government and even local government as well. And a big part of our heart is supporting not-for-profits as well, or what we call for-purpose organisations. So our people are driven by purpose and passion. And really, I think something that sets us apart is our spirit of collaboration, right? We work together as a team to get and make and solve problems. The three people that you see in the picture there are three of the founding owners and partners. We've subsequently added another 2 partners to the organisation, one for our engineering practice and one who focuses on FedGov, particularly in procurement sort of space. But what we like about this particular picture is it resonates with us. It sort of reflects who we are as an organisation. A little bit fun, a little bit funky. And I guess in some ways we don't take ourselves too seriously like some organisations might. So We also understand the value of working alongside our customers. I think that's what probably also differentiates us. In some cases, our customers don't even know that we are not part of their, let's call it, APS team. So, and we like to embed ourselves into those teams to create an effect. All right, Dan, I don't know if your comms are any better. Do you want to add to that?
Kim, I think it might be a problem at your end.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, you guys can hear me now?
Yeah, my end.
Okay, cool. So yeah, all right, comms check done. Nothing to add to that though. Thanks, Kim.
All right. From a I guess a vision, mission, and objectives perspective, and this is very much focused on our change and change management practice. Our vision is to apply an evidence-based approach to transform how change is managed across government in particular. And our mission is very much to empower leaders to drive change using an evidence-based and data-driven insights. So that is to say, it's a little bit more of a scientific approach, as opposed to, I think sometimes we changes, and I'd love to see some hands up as to who identifies himself as a change manager, but often change managers are identified as tree huggers. Not my terminology, but I'll use it as the example today because it differentiates us from, I guess, the tree hugging perspective to the data-driven and evidence-based approach to organisational change management. Any hands in terms of who identifies himself as a change manager? I'm hoping Dan will put his hand up because of he's a long-term changey. Our objective is very much Parbery to be seen as, I guess, the change practice in Canberra. I'm going to challenge that a little bit, and we came up with as a team with this particular vision, mission and objective a little while ago. Our change team has expanded beyond Canberra to the extent that we've got people now up in Brisbane, and whilst we don't have any change people in our practice down in Adelaide, I expect in the fullness of time we will see that. But certainly we want to deliver consistency and quality by employing and growing the best people that we can find, and applying the Parbery evidence-based methodology to delivering data-driven change and insights. So that's our why, how, and what, and a little bit about, I guess, our position around how we manage change. Any adds to that, Dan?
Yeah, I think Kim, I completely pick up on the evidence-based approach for transformation. I agree with you. I've been kicking around in the change space for well over a decade now, and quite often you get theorists that come in and they want to have this approach of pulling a whole bunch of methodologies together, and it's a one-size-fits-all approach, and quite often it can miss the mark. Whereas I think when you can be a little bit more strategic up front and understand what you're doing and support that by actually having the evidence to go with it, so you can have a facts-based conversation, you invariably get much better change results on the way through.
Yeah. I might just highlight the leadership piece. So often we are brought in as change managers to support an organisation through some sort of change, and the best case scenario is where the leadership of that organisation is brought in and takes an active role in change management. And this goes a little bit to our perspective, I think, which is coming up in a minute. But what we do is we provide the data-driven or evidence-based approach for that leadership group or leaders of a change to drive that change. So it isn't based on gut feel. It isn't based on a sense. It's actually based on a methodology, based on fact, shall we say, based on evidence. So with that, Dan, I think we might move on. Right, so this is where I started to touch on it. Were you going to talk to this one, Dan, if you can?
I certainly can. So this is just expanding on the what, why, how. So this is really driving down into essentially what we see as being what change should be, and we will probably bore you to death with this concept of being evidence-based and data-driven by the end of the 6-part series, but that is really, really front and foremost in what we do and the way we approach stuff. So whether it be taking a quick scale and complexity component, or looking at a change impact assessment and managing the gap, or any number of different things, we need to be able to support what we're doing to deliver those concrete benefits. I also am a huge fan, supporter. I don't think you can underestimate the importance of active leadership in a change. I mean, the reality of it is we come in as change managers, consultants, but it's actually the business that needs to change and drive the change. And it's the leaders which are the ones that really need to, be front and foremost in that. My experience through many, many years has been that, leaders want to be out in front of these changes. It's around them having the confidence to do so, and having the data and the evidence to support them, so that when they get up in front of a group of people, or they're talking at a town hall, or whatever it might be, that they're not vulnerable either. So they feel supported, they feel confident to drive that vision. But ultimately, when you change someone's job, it is up to the boss, the boss's boss, whatever that might be, in order to tell that person to change their job, not some consultant changey that has been brought in for a particular project. Whenever we're doing any kind of project activity, obviously there's a degree of risk, which comes with any project. I mean, a good PM will unpack and review their risk register every couple of weeks. A bad PM will do it at the beginning and end. But what we want to be doing is taking that same approach with our change risks, and looking at where are the areas that we're potentially underinvesting or not getting traction through the business to deliver that change, and then actively manage them, not just avoid them and fingers crossed hope they go away. Ultimately, with any kind of change, when we're looking at the above the line or the business side of the change, realistically, it's about building those new organizational competencies. All too often, it's like, oh, you're a change manager, can you write me some comms? It's like, well, comms is an important component of it, but we have lots of different levers to lift competencies around. It could be in-depth training, it could be putting together fact sheets, it could be just your straight up comms. But ideally, what we're doing is we're building new organizational competencies, and making people feel confident to go from where they are today to where they are tomorrow. If people feel comfortable and confident that they're supported through that journey, quite often, it makes it a much easier situation. My take is that most people want to come to work and do a good job. Where they push back is where they feel like they're potentially at risk of not being able to perform at the level they want. When we look at our change strategies as well, so moving on to, I think I touched on it earlier, that obviously we want to do a right-sized approach. You can come in and you can take a heavy methodology and you can go, hey, look, here's all of the steps that we need to follow. But while there is a process, there's certainly an opportunity to right-size that process. So you need to understand the change. How big is that change and how much work do you need in that? That becomes flexible. What you need to do to manage that change and deliver on that change, that becomes a flexible conversation. So it's about putting a right-sized approach in there. Obviously, last but not least, much like we went back to the leadership side of things, so it's really important that we have our leaders out the front leading the change. We want to have a cross-functional team working to deliver this as well. So it shouldn't be a single point of failure. It should be multidisciplinary cross-functional teams to be able to bring in multiple viewpoints to give us the best picture possible. So that's our philosophy. So basically, we want it to be evidence-based. We want it to be leader-led. We want to manage the risks. We want to improve the business and the capabilities within the business. We want to make sure we do the right amount of work. It's the Goldilocks approach, not too much, not too little, just right. Yeah, and we need to have everybody on the journey.
Thanks, Dan. And by the way, there's a few people that have joined us, and I appreciate that you have. So whilst I'm at it, I might just say that one of our philosophies is very much about sharing our IP. So this slide deck will go out to all the participants that have joined us today, and all the subsequent packages that go out as well, or the subsequent webinar series that we have. We'll send out that information to our participants too. What I might also say is that poor old Dan, he's not well today. So if he feels or sounds a bit flat to you, for those people that know him, it's because he's really, really unwell, and he's decided to join us anyway. So commitment there, I think, all around. So am I still voiced? Yeah. One other thing I guess I wanted to do, and something that Dan and I and Michelle are passionate about, and some of the other change team that have joined us today, we're very passionate about, I guess, sharing our IP. I mentioned that a moment ago. Down the back end of this slide deck, there's some tools that you can utilise, and we're more than happy, like we're passionate changes, right? So we're more than happy to have a conversation and a chat about change anytime, either outside of this session or even inside this session. So if you've got some comments or to make, throw them into the chat, and we'll see whether we can answer them along the way, and make this, I guess, an enriched process as we go forward. So Dan, I think, was this one going to be you?
Sorry. Yes, it is. So I will keep going along. I'm hoping my voice is staying around a little bit, so we're getting there. So look, when you have a look at our Parbery methodology, and as Kim said, we're more than happy to share our IP. The methodology we've put together for Parbery, and hence the reason we have the 6 sessions. Pardon me, the 6 sessions that we're running over the next 6 weeks, is we will today be looking at assessing the change. So this falls into the business case area. As you move through to initiate, develop, implement, evaluate. So that's your standard project phase normally. It aligns with your 2 past processes. It can align with your defence change methodology. It's a pretty stock standard approach to doing projects. And then what we've done is we've said, well, throughout the project life cycle, what is the effort and benefit that you can get? So when we're putting together a business case, and we'll talk through this in more detail in a minute, there's some pretty low effort activities that you can actually do in putting together your business case, which is going to set you up for success around, properly having a well, I wouldn't say you're going to have an in-depth, detailed understanding of what the overall change impacts are going to be, but you can have a look at the scale and complexity. So you can kind of put a finger in the air and go, look, this is about how many people are impacted and to this level of severity. And we've got a couple of tools that we can talk you through in the change canvas, where we've actually got in the last slide of this presentation. That you guys can potentially take away and use with the people you're doing a change on, but it'll allow you to scope that change out. So I think we might just move on to the next slide then.
Dan, before you go,
I
might add a little bit from my perspective.
Yeah.
One thing that Dan and I and the team are really keen on, particularly for this webinar series, is to bring it to life with real life examples. And in this case, the real life example for me is, and I don't know how many change managers have been brought on to engagements where pretty much the change is underfunded, and therefore you're way behind the 8 ball because change was added as an afterthought rather than right at the beginning of the process. The Department of Finance used to have a manual on developing business cases, and I do not recall what it's called for the life of me. But in there, they used to have it as a mandatory thing to kind of scope the cost of change, at least at a high level, so that you can actually gear up for it at the point in time you need to. Now, the subtlety in this particular slide shows that obviously the implement is where most of the change rubber hits the road, and we'll be talking about that in session 4. But it progressively increases over time as you go forward. And then what's subtle, I guess, also down the bottom here is session 6, which is measurement and reporting. But really, measurement and reporting really starts at the very, very beginning of an initiative, shall I call it that? And the initiative may start at that business case level where you're actually just trying to scope the size of the change and fund it properly. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear from people along the way how often they've been brought on as a change kind of resource, almost at the 11th hour, if not too late, and it's somewhat under-resourced because they didn't think about it or it wasn't thought about at the very beginning of the process. So this is what this is about, is kind of assessing the size and scope and depth of change so that you can resource it properly at the point in time that you do need it. So we'll see whether we can inject a few anecdotes along the way. We can move on, Dan.
Is there actually any comments from the audience on that? I'm sure anyone who's been working in change for even a short period of time will have been pretty familiar with that experience of, hey, this thing goes live in 2 months' time. We've been working on it for 3 years, but no one knows about it. Quick, make the change work.
Yeah. All right. Feel free to add comments on the side there. Appreciate any comments that you make. We'll see whether we can answer those questions for you. So, okay.
Excellent. So, just to give us some context around it. So, realistically, when we look at change activities, there's a pretty solid set of evidence that says, basically when you look at least 50% of change activities, if they lack the executive support and active sponsorship that they need. So, we talked about the importance of leader-led in the Parbery approach. It's something that's quite evident. So the other one is, and I love this little comment, I don't know if you guys can see it properly, but it's just nickels and dimes, fear of change. But realistically, there's going to be an immediate reaction to people of, well, so at least some people will be going, hey, what do we need to change? We're comfortable, we're doing it while we're doing it. Happy days. There's then the next logical set of activities that happen, which are the detractors. So, why are we looking at that system again? Why are we looking at that change again? Is that actually the best solution? So there's always going to be that little bit of to and fro, backwards and forwards around, is it the best solution? You're always going to run into that cultural and structural resistance. For the most part, particularly across government defence, I mean, there's an operational imperative, right? Government can't fail, defence needs to function. So they tend to be, I would say, more conservative in their approach to doing initiatives, and running projects, as opposed to something like I guess a Google or a tech company where it's, fail fast, throw it out there, see what happens. If it doesn't work, no problem. There's very different organizational priorities. And then obviously there's the overall lack of prioritization. It's like, hey, we've got this amazing thing that's going to make your life so much easier, but people are just looking at it going, hey, come on guys, look, I'm busy. I don't have time to understand this new way of doing things, even though if I took the time to understand it, we're going to be in a situation where life just becomes so much easier. Any comments, Kim?
No, I mean, and I'm sure most people have experienced this or any one of these anecdotes here. And I'm not one to ever go off script, am I, Dan? So here I am, I'm about to go off script just a little bit. If I could ask you to do one thing at the beginning of any change process, and the thing that will make the biggest difference would be to identify the individual or individual leader that will own the changed state? Who is going to own this change in business as usual, in the business as usual sense? Because they'll be active voices in wanting to make that that change happen and to resource it effectively. So yeah, identify who it is, so that then you can get that leadership kind of voice into the project. And the other thing then that would help with, I guess, in terms of those things that are identified on this screen in terms of the fear of change, if, any resistance and lack of support, so on and so forth. If you've actually got an active and leadership group, then you're actually going to have so much more likely success than you would otherwise. But yeah, if you could do one thing, or if I could encourage you to do one thing, it would be to identify who is going to own the change in BAU. And I don't know how many projects I've walked into, when you ask that question, they go, we're not sure. We don't know. So that'd be one, the one big risk for me. The other thing is, I would then, from a scientific, let's call it scientific, from a practical point of view, whilst project managers run risk and risk registers, run some risk workshops around what happens in BAU with regard to the change or the risks associated with adoption, so that person who you've identified or who you eventually identify as an owner of the change in the business can understand what the risks are and then what the treatments of those risks are, and hopefully that will help influence you at the beginning of the process where you assess that change. So hopefully some of these anecdotes that are on screen ring true, and there'll be plenty of others. I'd love you to share any if you have any. Just type it up in the chat or any questions that you might have in the chat. And again, Dan and I will look to try and answer those questions on the way through. That's it from me, Dan.
Perfect. So I think you sort of touched on it, Kim, that change is actually multifaceted. That when we're actually looking for the success factors, so we know where change often fails. But so what do we need to do in order to actually make it successful? So you can have a really, really strong vision, and quite often actually at the business case phase, this is where the vision really comes out. It's like, we've got to change this thing because of an operational imperative or whatever it might be. But if you don't have a strong vision, people will just be confused. It's like, why am I changing? We've talked about the skills and uplifting the business. So if we don't have everybody ready to go and skilled up, then people will experience that anxiety. It's like, do I know how to use a new system? I've been using this system for X period of time. I'm considered an SME. What happens when I move across into the new world if I can't do my job properly? And there's that anxiety because of that exposure. If people don't understand the benefits, obviously that's where the resistance comes in. So that's where you start to see that, I'm too busy to change because I don't really understand that a round wheel is so much better than a square wheel because no one's taken the time to explain that to me. One of the things I think is really common, and I've run into a lot, has been lack of resourcing. So when we're trying to change the business, so when we change something as a project, we normally bring on a whole bunch of project resources, BAs, technical people, PMO, PMs, change managers. The project is fully staffed to deliver the change, but we don't really consider our people in BAU, which are actually the ones that need to adopt the change at the end of the day. What we normally do is we go into them and say, look, we know you've got your 9-to-5 day job and we expect all this stuff on top of it. So really making sure that you resource the business out properly is just so critical. And then obviously we need to have an action plan, or a project plan. Otherwise we'll kick off and we'll get a little way down the path, and then we'll have to re-baseline, then we'll go a little bit further down the path, then we'll change our scope, then we'll go a little bit further down the path, then we'll re-baseline because we discovered that the scope needs to be adjusted again, and so on and so forth. And as we're going out and having the conversations within the business, we erode the business's confidence in our ability to deliver, because they're like, oh yeah, here's this project again. They've been talking about doing this for 2 years. 10 years, whatever it might be. So we need to consider all of these aspects in order to be able to set ourselves up for success on our way through the project. So Kim, anything there before we jump on the next slide?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think through some anecdotes and some, where we've experienced some of these things. Benefits just jumped out off the page to me. And the reason is that often ICT-led change initiatives or change projects will have some sort of benefits or benefits realisation plan. And it may be the case that that is, that there is one of those for non-ICT-led changes. But it's usually undervalued from a change management perspective. But it's the first place where I can start to get, in my experience anyway, it's the first place where you start to get some narrative that you can start to utilise in your comms. And, for us, comms is about getting a shared understanding across, stakeholder groups and the like. But it seems to be one of the last things that apart from ICT projects, not all ICT projects for that matter, that is brought to the fore. So I guess the other thing is sometimes it can be seen as a very financial oriented thing. And really what we want to do is make sure that we articulate what are the business benefits, and hopefully the benefits realisation plan does start to articulate that. For me, if I were starting off in any new change engagement, again, I can encourage you to do the same, is run a benefits workshop. Create a benefits network map and understand what the ultimate end benefits are that you can start to utilise as a narrative for your stakeholders, and to bring them, if you like, hate to say it, but on the journey to helping them understand what it is that's going on. That doesn't mean they're ready to change, but at least you've got some narrative there. The other thing that I find that is very often not or is underrated is an action plan. So who's got to do what, when, where and how is such a powerful thing, but it's often articulated in nebulous terms, and it's very hard to, I guess, help people through a change if you're not telling them how you're going to do that. And so that action plan is super, super important. And the way that we articulate an action plan is, again, we roll it up to ultimate capabilities and benefits, but it's who, what, when, where and how as a plan. Skills, it's hard sometimes to understand what skills are needed in a BAU or a new state or a new change state, but it's worth putting the effort in up front to understand what that might look like. And in some cases it's new skills, in some cases it's new capabilities, for whole new workforces. So, and that depends on the nature and scope and size of that change, but just some thoughts there. But again, what this demonstrates here is if one of those key planks is missing, then, you're likely to find yourself somewhere on the axis of confusion, anxiety, resistance, frustration, false starts before you hit success. So, a simple slide to kind of articulate some of the elements there. Thanks, Dan.
So, so we spent a little bit of time talking about, what are the key resistant factors, and we've sort of contextualised those around, why do you need to have all of the components in place in order to address those. So as we said, there's actually only a couple more slides left in this presentation, this one and the next one. So this is where I would normally start any kind of change work, and I would start with a simple scale and complexity piece of work. At this particular point, we're not trying to get down into, this team does this level 4 process this way today, and they do this level 4 process tomorrow. What we're really trying to do is we're really trying to go, what are the big picture components which link through to the previous two slides around how committed are you, executive, leadership, and sponsors. So if this is a really strategic piece of work and you've got really strong sponsorship and leadership, hey, look, tick, good on you. You're sitting in an awesome position. But often executives and sponsors are very busy. Quite often people end up in sponsorship roles and they're not completely clear around what the role of the sponsor is in that sponsorship environment as well. So depending on where your leadership is in their commitment to your activity, that will impact the amount of work you need to do. So realistically, at the end of a scale and complexity piece of work, what it does is it gives us a level of effort, or I'd call it a ROM, a rough order of magnitude, on how much work is it going to require to deliver this change successfully. Committed leadership, fantastic. You're on a winner. That reduces your effort. At the other end of the spectrum, non-committed new leadership, you're going to have to do a lot of work in that space. So that's going to be a factor around the effort that you're going to need to put in. So what's changing? When is it changing? And who will it be who will be impacted? We touched on the example earlier around how many people have been brought into a project, and it's like got 2 months to go, and then all of a sudden, no one knows about it. We're getting massive pushback. Quick change manager, go and fix it. Yeah, so really understanding what your lead time is, to that impact. When is it going to be impacted, and who's going to be impacted as a result of it? So is it a whole of business? Is it a single department? Is it a global organization? Just how big is that organization? How disparate is the workforce as well? If I spent most of my 20 years, I've been in Canberra for nearly 3 years, but for the last better part of 20 years prior to that, I worked mostly for international companies. So dealing with delivering change across Europe and Australia and America and South America, that disparate workforce, different cultures, etc., adds a huge amount of work and complexity to what you're delivering. So moving on to that, how many people are impacted and to what level? So again, this is not going down into your level 4 processes. This is really just looking at, we have, Department of Finance, that's 7,000 people. We have, a whole of Army, 36,000 people. We have whatever it might be. But just, how many people are going to be impacted? And then we can sort of say, well, look, if we look across the hierarchy and structure, these guys are going to be peripherally impacted. These guys are going to be primary impacted. These guys are going to be somewhere in between. And again, depending on how many people and to what level they're impacted, that's going to be a massive impact on how much effort you're going to need to put into managing and delivering the change. We've talked a couple of times already about the sufficient funding and resources and time. So this is why it's so important that at the business case end of putting together your project, that you're actually considering the scale and complexity of the process, because it gives you some evidence-based, data-driven insights to be able to turn around and say, look, we're going to have to do a huge amount of work with our exec to get them lined up. There's a whole bunch of people that are going to be impacted in a very short period of time. To we think a medium and a high level, we can't do that at a 0.1 resource per week. It's just not going to be feasible. And as Kim alluded to earlier, do we know who's going to own the capability in BAU? Because if we don't know who that end business owner is, as changes, they're the people we need to work with, and I believe be advocates for throughout the process. So we need to have clear understanding around that. So they're the kind of top 5 factors that I would look at when I'm sort of going, how hard is this going to be? How much do I have to lean in to get this done? I haven't had the dream scenario where I've got really committed leadership. I've got a really nice long lead time. There's a whole bunch of people that are kind of medium impacted. We've got lots of time and money to do it, and we have really clear ownership. That would be your best case scenario. Pretty unusual. I haven't seen the antithesis of that, where it's all rubbish. Normally, most projects sit somewhere in between, where there's areas that are more advanced and less advanced. Before I move on to the next part in the slide, Kim, do you want to talk around the key factors?
I think I was doing the second half of this slide, but I might just make a point that ProSci often covers off these things. They've got a nice, neat little tool to help scope the things that Dan's just spoken about. What I will say about ProSci and or any other methodologies for that matter, and I'm helping you save your voice too, Dan. What I might say about some of these methodologies, if you're a slave to it, then I think you're also going to find yourself in a little bit of strife. Context is very, very important, and slavishly adhering to a methodology in the wrong context will have you find yourself in all sorts of strife, I think. So that said, the good change managers will have a good kit bag of different tools and or methods by which they can scope and define the size of change, and obviously then help deliver that change as it goes forward. Whilst I'm I've got the mic, I might just make a note about what John's saying in there as well. So John's, I think it was John who reinforced benefits realisation plans as important, and I couldn't agree more. But the other thing is that often the implementation of a new capability will actually impact an organisation and require a new operating model or a new org design, or both. And often changes don't do that well. Well, I would say that a change management effort is actually a team effort, and so often you'll need comms people to support the comms work. You'll need stakeholder engagement people to support the stakeholder engagement work. You'll need organisational alignment type of capabilities to do, systems, people, process, organisation, culture type change alignment, and so on and so forth. So it's a team effort, and org design and operating models are a very important part of that mix. In terms of setting up a project for success, again, we have a methodology, but again, almost the first line in our methodologies don't apply it slavishly, but it does give us some buckets and some streams of effort and work to have a look at. So the first point here that we've got here is in terms of what is the right governance model to manage the change. I would always advise young change managers and those people that are entering the discipline to have a look at managing successful programs. If you there's some very good mechanisms there to change, or methods there, I guess, to manage change at a governance level. If whoever is training there, the MSP, understands change, and then sometimes they think, that it's trained or taught by project managers and they miss the change management piece of it. But if you're doing it, ask the question, how's change managed, and how's change represented in an MSP kind of context. I often define governance models at the beginning of change process, utilising an MSP-like or style approach, by the way. So worth having a look at that. Is there a shared vision? And is there a shared understanding, which is the third tile around? So usually it starts with understanding before you can kind of share that vision, or it depends actually on the change. But have a look at that. Is there a shared vision? Is there even a vision? And often the benefits realisation plan will start to give you a sense of what that vision looks like, by the way. So again, not all projects have gone through that formally, but if you're starting out on a new initiative or a new change, have a look for that. Look for the language and or what that shared vision might look like for you. How will the enhanced capability be delivered? And again, there's system, people, process, organisation, cultural kind of elements to this, and maybe look at it through those lenses as you're kind of assessing what that change looks like. How will you drive a shared commitment? Clearly at the end of the day, and this goes to some of our scientific approach to this, is where along the spectrum of do our stakeholders, to those that are impacted, how much do they understand as opposed to how much are they committed to a change along that spectrum? And not everyone needs to be committed to a change, by the way, so it's worth defining your stakeholder groups and audiences so that you understand that there are some people that you've got to bring to a level of commitment, whereas others, they just need to understand it, and there is a difference. And lastly, is there capacity to work? And that goes to training. So what sort of training, education, it may be required of an existing or new workforce that you might be looking at. So there's some of the areas that you want to have a look at. Now, Steve has just asked a question. Is there a particular PM methodology that aligns with change management, or does it depend on the context? Look, I think it's useful for every change management manager to do some project management training, and there are some good leaves you can take out of the project management playbook in terms of managing change, because managing change, let's face it, is like a project in itself. And you also need to know how your project manager is thinking. So whether they're using, PMBOK or Prince2 or whatever, I'm not sure it matters a lot. But you want to try and find a common language between the project manager or program manager and yourself as a change manager. But I would say once you've done a Prince2 or a PMBOK or something like that, it is possibly worth looking at MSP, because I think there's some really, really good things out of that you can take as a change manager. So it's a good question, Steve. Well asked. I've given you a lawyer's answer, perhaps, in terms of it depends. But at the very least, I would encourage anybody who's entering the discipline to have done some sort of project management certification, if you like, because I think that's going to help. Sorry, Dan, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to cover off here.
No, I think we're just coming up on time anyway, Kim. So I think it was perfect time to transition across. So other than our close slide, this is a tool that we've included that will be sent out as part of this deck. So if you're about to start off or kick off your own change initiative, I'd certainly encourage you to do this with some of your key stakeholders, your leaders, and as much of the business as you can. This is a change canvas tool. I really like this version of it. There's lots of different types of them, but really the idea is when you do this exercise that you have a bunch of people standing around a room, post-it notes potentially, depending on what your preferred working methodology is, but really debating what the vision is for the project, what your dependencies timeline is going to look like. You can talk through what your target state is. Really give your success criteria. It's only a little box, but your success criteria are just so important. So really, hone in on what you think the success criteria are. You can start to pull out some of your questions around what's your audience, so who's going to be impacted, and you can do it at a department level or a team level. Again, we're not trying to get down to really detailed change impact assessments at this point in time. It's just really, Bob's team's going to be impacted about this much kind of stuff, right? So you're just getting a feel for it. How do you measure success? And getting agreement on that up front is going to be really important as well. Because quite often you get 2/3 of the way through a project, it's like, you're doing a rubbish job, or this isn't going as well as we thought it was going to. And you're like, well, hang on, we've been working towards these success criteria. So they're important for people to understand what it is that you're working towards. You can start to pull out some of your key activities. So, if you're doing an ICT project, I mean, there's some pretty simple ones around, when does testing start? When does the initial release occur? When does final release occur? There's a number of key activities, but what do you see as being the important things that you need to do throughout the delivery of the project? And again, just coming back to the risks, where do we see those points of resistance, or where do we think the risks are? So something for you to take away, use with people that you're going through a potential project with, and I think you'll be pleased with some of the stuff that comes out of doing an exercise. It's quite remarkable. I would suggest that you do it over possibly 2 2-hour sessions. First 2 hours, get people in a room, start to flesh it out, take it away, clean it up, come back to them and do another hour or even 2 hours, just refining that down. But yeah, great tool, strongly recommend it.
I don't know how many times I've started a change initiative and the target state, even at a high level, isn't understood. And who is going to be impacted by the change. So this is a good canvas to help sort of unpack and unpick some of these things. I tend to then put a spreadsheet behind this in terms of what is the resourcing that we're likely to need across the project to achieve a target state and so forth. And the unit of measure is the number of resources times the pricing or dollars and cents required to achieve, I guess, some of these things. And that's what will give you the high level costing across the life of the project to implement or drive adoption of some sort of new and change state. So that's when you're scoping the change. Dan, and I think the next session is all about getting a detailed understanding of the change, doing a change assessment, right? So, so I guess that.
Yeah, that's correct, Kim. So the next session is really, delving down into that more detailed around how, scoping and building a deeper understanding. Yeah.
So, and I'm conscious that we're over time a little bit. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, we love talking change every day. So if you want to email us, I think we've got an email address there. If you send it to that email address, our office people will get around to us and we'll answer your question. Or if you want a conversation, God, we can chew the fat on change all day, every day, actually. And any one of us in any one of the team that we've got. So more than happy to take comments and or feedback as well. And we kind of look forward to the next session, actually, where we get to talk about our favourite subject in a lot more detail than we have today, because noting that today is really about scoping the change. So I think that's it, Dan. Anything you want to add?
No, thank you, everyone. And my apologies for my gravelly, squeaky voice.
Hope you're feeling better next time, Dan. Thanks, everybody.